how are functions defined and created? For that matter, what's the difference between a function definition and the moment of function creation? Is there even a difference? That's what we're going to look at right now. And these concepts, there are a few that I want to cover right now, and they are really critical to understanding functions. I mean, these are some of these topics are things that I didn't have a clear understanding of for years until I finally really sat down and decided to just learn the fundamentals and really understand the basically what is the life of a function in JavaScript right from the beginning, right from the moment of definition and the moment of creation. So let's jump right into it. You're watching the fundamental principles of JavaScript, and I'm your host, Marek. Let's take a look. So we're going to be talking about three principles that are key to functions, namely defining, creating, and calling functions. These are basically the three big things that you do with a function. But there's something here that I want you to notice. We often actually talk about function definitions, where the function is defined, and then we talk about function calls. But we have three principles here. There's one extra one, creating functions. And yeah, I want to actually just to point that out, that we're going to be explaining the difference between what a function definition is and what is the moment of actual function creation. And they're not the same thing. All right, let's go. Number one, the function definition. We'll start by explaining what this is. A function definition, first of all, is a place in the code. It's where in the code your function is defined. So that's a good starting point because you can see that in the code. You can go into your code and you can find where this place is. And it's an expression. A function definition is an expression. Now let's kind of look at that because I think we need to unpack that a little bit. Namely, there are multiple kinds of function expressions. In JavaScript in particular, there are two big types of function expressions. There are the classical function expressions. These are the ones that use the function keyword. So they exist since the beginning of the language. The function keyword is what tells you that they're classical function expressions, right? But there's another kind of function expression, and they are the arrow functions, the so-called arrow functions. Now, if we want to dig a little bit deeper in this classification, then we will find there are actually multiple variants, and I'll point out that classical functions have two variants specifically. They are the anonymous and the named function expressions, whereas arrow functions are actually always anonymous. And you can tell the difference between the anonymous and the named functions because the name actually is present. So even though these functions have a name, they're still function expressions. In other words, each of these expressions evaluates to a function. When a function expression is evaluated, the resulting value is the function. Now that's an important distinction. We're talking about expressions, which are places in the code, and then we're talking about the moment of evaluation. So that's actually key. That point is key to our next principle. So we've said that a function definition is a place in the code and it's an expression. Now, number two, the function creation, the moment of function creation, first of all, it's a moment in time. We're no longer talking about a place in the code. We're now talking about a moment in time. And specifically, what moment is it? It's a moment where the function expression gets evaluated. In other words, it's when that expression executes, so to speak. So this can happen Well, it can happen more than once. Let me explain. You might think, well, okay, I have a script here. Suppose I have this script. This is my script called script.js. And in this script, I have a function. Function hello. This is a function expression. Now, when I run this script, what's going to happen? The function expression is going to get evaluated. And at that moment, basically, as my script is evaluated from top to bottom, it's going to reach this expression, it's going to evaluate it, and that's the moment of function creation. So why did I say that it can happen more than once? Well, these function expressions can actually exist anywhere in the code. They don't have to be just in the body of a script. And let's consider an example. I have another script here, script 2. Now, function create is a function that I have here. Now, like in the first example, the code is going to run top to bottom. And yeah, this function create will in fact be created once as this point is reached in the code. But what do I have inside? I've actually placed inside of my function a return statement that returns another function expression. And this one is an anonymous function. Yeah, I can do that, right? You can put a function expression like that anywhere in JavaScript. So now it turns out that if I were to call, like imagine if I were to call after, at the end here, if I were to call my function, then the body of the function will run and this expression will get evaluated. Now, what if I call it a second time or even a third time? Yeah, that's right. The expression will be evaluated every time. And every time the return statement is going to return a new function because that is the moment of function creation. That's the definition. Function creation is when a function expression gets evaluated. No matter where or when that happens, that's the moment of function creation. And there we go. I just proved that you can have that happen multiple times. So that's it. That's the definition of function creation. It's a moment in time. We know that a function expression is getting evaluated, and it can happen more than once. Function creation. So now you kind of see why it's useful to think of function definition and function creation as two separate things. One is a place in the code. The other one is a moment in time. So that's an important distinction. Let's go to point number 3. So point number 3 is the idea of the function call. Now this is where functions become useful, right? It's fun to create functions, but when are we actually going to use them? Well, we're going to make some function calls, and that's when functions become useful, obviously. Another word, actually, I want to share another word for a function call. So function calls are also known as, the function call is also known as an invocation. You can use that as a verb. Instead of saying we're going to call a function, I could say we're going to invoke a function. That's just exactly the same thing. So like we did with the first two, let's define that. What is a function call? It's a moment in time. Yeah, well, that makes sense. It's in the time that your script is running. It's the moment when your function actually gets called. And what happens when when does that happen, basically, is what I'm saying? Well, it's when a call expression gets evaluated. Now, this is interesting because we kind of just talked about when a function expression gets evaluated. That's function creation. Now we're talking about when a function call expression gets evaluated. So there's a subtle but clear difference there. Instead of a function expression getting evaluated, we are now seeing a call expression get evaluated. So what does that look like? Well, we know what that looks like. If you've ever written any JavaScript at all, then you've seen what a call expression looks like. It is composed of, here on the left, well, it's an expression which should evaluate, and let me just clarify, that is a sub-expression. So it's just an expression that is part of this call expression. Which evaluates to a function value. In other words, well, this is the function that we want to call. There are other sub-expressions here, and these are the arguments, but let's call them the argument sub-expressions. And these parentheses, by the way, these brackets, they hold the whole expression together. This is really what a call expression is identified by. If you have these brackets like this, especially the fact that they are following an actual function value, that's what makes this a call expression. Okay, so we're evaluating this expression, and that's a function call. Great. And that's the distinction. So you now see that there are two main moments in the life cycle of a function, and that's, first of all, function creation, and second of all, it's the function call. And you'll notice something else here, another relationship. For every function that's created, it can be called more than once. The function call, it can happen more than once, absolutely, right? Of course, you can create a function once, and of course, you can call it a whole bunch of times. That is pretty obvious and straightforward. I want to recap this, and I want to recap this in a way that shows you the pattern, because what I've just done is I've given you a really quick run through these concepts, okay? A couple of definitions, basically, but there is a pattern here. And I want to show this. We're going to try to do that by doing a kind of a table here. All right, here's our table that we're going to fill out with these concepts, and I've just done something sneaky here because I just snuck in a fourth concept. I started out by talking about definitions, creations, and then calls, but I snuck in this extra point, which is a call site, because you might have noticed that I spoke about, well, the place. Actually, let's start filling in this table. The definition, what is it? Well, like we said, it's a place in the code. We started talking about a place, and then we said, well, what happens to this expression? Because this is, in fact, an expression. What happens upon the creation? Well, it's when, first of all, it's a moment in time. And what that moment represents is an expression being evaluated. In fact, I'll just qualify that by saying it's a function expression evaluated. Then I jumped down to the call. The call is, like I said as well, a moment in time. And it corresponds to the moment where what gets evaluated? It's a call expression. There we go. A call expression just got evaluated. That's the moment when a call happens. But there's this missing row that I haven't filled out, and it's actually the kind of what corresponds, the expression that corresponds to the definition in the case of creation, while the call site is the place, right? The place in the code. And that corresponds to the expression that will be evaluated. So it's the location of the call expression, just like the definition is the location of the function expression. Makes sense. It's now showing you the pattern that we have here. These four elements, four principles really, make up the life cycle of a function. And as we explored, there may be one definition which leads to multiple creation instances. And once you've created these functions, you might have multiple call sites. Why not? And for each call site, well, the code could reach that site multiple times easily. So you have multiple calls. And that's it. That's our big picture of the life cycle of a function.